We want to get into more of the issue-based aspects of the speech. We were talking about the tariffs. We were talking about also, remember, those highlights, those key moments that are going viral on social media. But what about foreign policy? Mentions of the Israel-Hamas war and the Russia-Ukraine war. Let's talk about those very mentions with none other than my colleague again, Austin Westfall, here in the Live Now newsroom, and our colleague as well and friend, national security analyst and expert and retired Marine intelligence officer, Hal Kempfer here. Hal, I'll start, and we'll start on Russia and Ukraine here. After quite a contrite, lengthy post on social media by Zelenskyy today, how did Trump respond there in his speech to that?
Well, Andrew, I thought he responded very well, and we talked about this on the air that we didn't know how long this rift was going to go on. The events that took place in the Oval Office last Friday, all the things that happened this weekend. But the sense was, and President Zelenskyy had been pretty consistent all along, saying he was interested in doing this, quote, minerals deal, this economic package. He had made some comments about the war could go on for a very long time. He was got a very stern rebuke from President Trump on that for saying that, as if Zelenskyy wasn't dedicated to peace. And then this letter that was sent to President Trump, where he's talking about wanting peace, wants to sign the agreement right now. And the fact that he brought that up in the way that he did in that speech to a joint session of Congress tells me that this, I don't know if you want to call it an impasse, certainly a postponement, if you will, of what's going on, that this is going to move on. We're going to see a change in terms of what's happening.
So let's head to the Middle East. We'll talk about Gaza in a moment, but he did make an announcement today. He announced that the top terrorist involved in the attack at the Kabul airport during the Biden administration's pull out of Afghanistan has been captured. What did we learn today, Hal?
Well, that's Mohammed Sharafillah. He's also known as Jaffer. That's his operational name. Whether he was the very top, that's you could talk about that, whether, where he was in the pecking order. But he was a very senior planner in ISIS-K, or ISIS of Khorasan. That's that branch of ISIS that operates in Central Asia. That's the branch of ISIS that did the famous attack in Iran at Soleimani's funeral, and then did the famous attack at the mall up in Moscow. And they've been involved in a number of plots and attacks, some of which that haven't happened, some of which that have. And so basically what we have on that is that this was a joint Pakistani-U.S. or U.S. intelligence operation, and I can guess which organizations were involved with that, where they basically intercept him as he was coming across the border from Afghanistan. He was taken into custody. An FBI team went over to interview him, and certainly the FBI has gotten very, very good at doing these interviews over the last 20-some years, 25 years or whatever, certainly since 9/11. And they got out of him that he was one of the key planners for the Abbey Gate bombing. And now apparently he's on his way back to the U.S. Interestingly, and I don't know for sure, but the way the president described that, it sounds like he may stand trial in the United States. And historically, if you want to go back, many times that these individuals would simply be rendered into U.S. custody, and we'd put them down in Guantanamo, where they would basically be kind of in a limbo status, legally speaking. So obviously, there might be a little bit of a change. I find interesting that they may be taking him straight into the U.S. and put him into the federal court system.
While we're on that subject, I think it's worth mentioning, because we would be remiss if we didn't. One of the many stains in the wake of the botched pullout from Afghanistan there, of course, the terror attack at Abbey Gate at the Kabul airport that killed 13 U.S. service members. The United States' response, Hal, to who they thought at the time carried that out was also botched.
It was. They actually, and I got to tell you, when you're over there and you're tracking targets and you're looking for bad guys, there's a lot of different intelligence that you get. You get stuff that's, that's basically stuff that you see, if you will, imagery intelligence. And today it's usually live feed. You can have different types of measurements, signatures intelligence, obviously signals intelligence, listening to various phone calls or other communications. And you have to put that together very quickly. There was a lot of pressure to get that done. And unfortunately, it was a drone strike on a car, and it turned out not to be the terrorist, turned out to be a family, kind of adding tragedy onto tragedy. But The sad truth is that it's a battleground, and mistakes do happen. But in this case, it sounds like they've really gone through the process. They have somebody who is directly responsible. They're going to bring him back, and I would imagine that Jaffer has been a wealth of intelligence on ISIS-K and how they operate in Afghanistan and probably elsewhere around the region. So they've probably got a lot of valuable intelligence that they've been acting on before they ever make a statement like this. They would be acting on this to kind of bring it together. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see some other interesting announcements about U.S. operations against ISIS-K or allies' operations against ISIS-K in various disparate parts of the world.
Let's move over to Gaza. So we have talked at length about that video, that AI-generated video that the president sent out showing his vision of a futuristic Gaza. We did hear him briefly talk about the Israel-Hamas war during today's speech, Hal. Did he give us any more context, any more clarity as to where this war is headed and how close phase 2 of the ceasefire may actually be?
I didn't get a lot, briefly, I think is the operative term there. I didn't get a lot from that, Austin, he kind of threw that out there. I was waiting to hear more. I didn't hear a lot. Now, what I will say is in the background on this, as you may recall, the Arab League has been meeting in Cairo, and there is now a formal Arab League proposal led by Egypt on doing rebuilding. I think it's $59 billion in funds for the Middle East. These are non-U.S. funds, non-Israeli funds that would go into rebuilding Gaza. Has been put part of this proposal. The plan is not to relocate the Palestinian residents of Gaza to some other third country, but to keep them where they are. And I have to take a little step back, and you've heard me say this previously. That AI video you reference, if from a cultural context throughout the Arab countries, let's just say that is not well received. Okay, that is particularly. I would think they would take some offense to the poolside picture with Bibi Netanyahu and President Trump there with a refreshing beverage in front of this glorious resort. I almost got a sense that was put together particularly to spur the Arab nations into coming up with a proposal. And if that was the original intent, I think they need to get in the back closet, dig out that mission accomplished sign that we had after going into Iraq and put it up there, because they've certainly come up with I'm not saying it's the end of negotiations. I'm not saying that that's going to be the final plan, but they have spurred the Arab League certainly into doing something that the Arab League seemed to be dragging their feet on.
Hal, just lastly, we want to mention this. This was a piece of news in the speech. The president saying that he is creating within the White House an office of shipbuilding. Now, I would imagine this was music to your ears. This is a drum that you have been banging for years, that the United States military and other outfits need to shore up and increase production of not just military vessels, but commercial ones as well. What do you make of that idea, and will it make a difference?
Well, as you know, I do a lot of things in the maritime security realm, travel around the world, work with other countries in this area. One of the things, and of course, being a retired Marine, part of the Department of the Navy, shipbuilding is near and dear. And that has been a frustration literally going back over 25, 30 years. At the end of the Cold War, there was this base realignment and closure commission that was closing bases all over. And they closed a number of naval bases. The Navy, for example, in the Pacific, where our focus of effort is, dealing with the threat from China and dealing with possible operations in the West Pacific. Well, we closed most of our shipyards. We had one in Los Angeles, Long Beach area. We at the big port there, the biggest port in North America. We had one in San Francisco, fantastic port up there. We closed all those naval facilities, but particularly the naval shipyards. And then if you look all around the country, these naval shipyards have been closing and closing and closing. And we don't have enough shipyards to build the commercial ships that we need. And we're barely have enough to deal with the Navy requirements. And if we want to expand the Navy, as we've been talking about, building more ships, we just don't have those shipyards. So this is long overdue, doing something, and it needs something at that level. This was a crisis that nobody was talking about. It needs to be something done at that level. And the other thing too is you kind of heard this afterwards. This flag of convenience stuff with commercial vessels, where countries flag commercial vessels, and you got cruise ships that literally leave from America, come back from America, and they're under a foreign flag, whether it's Panama or Liberia or something like that. It sounds like they're going to kind of address that in a larger shipping sort of thing, because that goes into tax revenues. That's why they fly under those foreign flags. And you may have heard a word or two, maybe one, that President Trump said about taxes. I'm not sure if that was in the speech somewhere, but I thought I heard it once or twice that he wants to increase tax revenue. So I imagine that's going to fall. It's not a shipbuilding issue, although it kind of can become a shipbuilding issue.
Okay.
And I'm sure that's going to be something they talk about.
So you and I were texting offline, and you brought up two main points of discussion. And I think some people will be curious to know, are we moving any closer to taking more control over the Panama Canal? And what's the deal with Greenland, Hal? Did we get any more context?
I got to tell you, the Panama Canal comments really caught me by surprise, Austin. I heard that and I'm like, wow. I'm not sure if we're going in there or not. What I am hearing, though, is apparently there's some deal in place, and that kind of ties into it. As of this morning, one of the big issues is, Panama says we're going to divest these Hong Kong-owned company ports on the Pacific and Atlantic sides that had this tremendous control, vantage point, everything down there, which gave them a high degree of influence on all the canal operations. And they were going to go to another ownership, and one of the ownership was a Singapore-based company. Well, it turns out in the world of mergers and acquisitions, the Singapore-based company had been acquired by a Chinese-owned company. So that deal was going nowhere, and the U.S. had been protesting that. Now it sounds like there's something with a U.S.-owned company that's going to go in there to take over those vital shipyards, and they are critically placed within those two ports at each end. And also, I wouldn't be surprised if there's something done with that bridge, which is going over the canal, that new bridge. So it sounds like there's something big there. Now, on the Greenland side, all right, and I'm sure there's some in Denmark who think things are rotten, all right, if I may say so. But on the Denmark side, what is kind of transpiring here is there has been for quite some time, it is an autonomously run territory. It has, it's not completely sovereign, but it's under Denmark, but it has been self-governed for a very, very long time. There is an independence movement there that says break away from Denmark altogether, all right, and they're looking at that. They're not a big population, very small population, about 50-some thousand people. One of the things they're looking at is a U.S. model that we have in the Pacific called the Compact of Free Association. We had U.S. territories in the Pacific, Palau, Micronesia, Marshall Islands, that we kept going into like the 80s. And I think the last one was maybe sometime in the 80s, they became independent territories. However, we are responsible for their security, national security. And one of the things that I did going to those countries for years was working on their homeland security side of that. So in that regard, they're like U.S. territories. When people join the military in those countries, they join the U.S. military. That's been brought up as a model for Greenland. And if you look at the populations, I think, Palau's like 35,000 people. And if you look at the population of Greenland, you go, that model might actually work. And it was interesting because President Trump dovetailed his comments on Greenland talking about security, security, security. Security is the cornerstone of the compact system.
Yeah.
So if Greenland was to break away completely independent from Denmark, they could then enter into a compact with the U.S. Wouldn't make them a U.S. territory per se, but it would make them a U.S. country or whatever location where we are primarily responsible for their security matters.
I see.
That's something that's being talked about.
Yeah, the Washington Post has it as such that Trump declared his desire to claim Greenland, to laughter in the chamber, saying no modern president has tried to expand the size of U.S. territory, and Danish and Greenlandic policymakers believe Trump is entirely serious. Hal Kempfer, as always, Austin Westfall, good to see you as always. Thanks for being with us tonight. Let's slide away for yet another quick commercial break.